All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're going to tackle a concept that can feel, well, completely alien to us: ancient purity laws. And I want you to forget everything you think you know about hygiene or being dirty. We're about to explore the hidden logic of a system where just touching the wrong chair could get you temporarily banned from your community's most sacred rituals. So let's unpack this. Here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll nail down what ceremonial uncleanness actually is. Then, we're going to look at two specific case studies, one for men, one for women, to see how this whole system played out in real life. After that, we'll see what it took to get clean again. And finally, we'll zoom out to understand the big reason why these rules mattered so much. Okay, Section 1, Understanding Ceremonial Uncleanness. And the single most important thing to get right off the bat is this. This has nothing to do with being physically dirty. To make any sense of these rules, we've got to set aside our modern ideas about germs and soap and just step into a completely different way of seeing the world. So what are we really talking about? Well, ceremonial uncleanness was a temporary state. Think of it like a ritual status. It wasn't a sin, and it definitely wasn't about bad hygiene. It just meant that, for a little while, a person was not fit to be near sacred spaces or take part in community worship. It was a status that had a clear beginning and a clear process to end. And this chart lays it out perfectly. On the left, you've got this ritual uncleanness. It's a temporary thing, kind of like spiritual static that gets in the way of connecting with the sacred. But on the right, you've got what we call dirt. Just a matter of hygiene you can wash off. Nailing this difference is the absolute key to unlocking this whole ancient system. So let's see how this actually works. Our first case study is about male discharges, and this is where we can really start to trace the ripple of effect of uncleanness as it moves from a person to the things they touch and then on to other people. The starting point itself is really straightforward. The source text tells us that an unusual bodily discharge makes a man ceremonially unclean. So this person now becomes the primary source of this ritual state, which can then be passed on. And here's where we see that ripple effect in action. The state of uncleanness just radiates out from this one person. It seeps into the bed he sleeps on, the chair he sits in, and then if someone else comes along and touches that same chair, bam, the state is transmitted to them too. It's a literal chain reaction. And get this, the system even extends to objects. But look at the fascinating detail here. A porous clay pot that gets contaminated has to be shattered, like it's seen as permanently absorbing the uncleanness. But a non-porous wooden item, it just needs to be rinsed, and it's good to go. This shows us there's a real consistent logic at play here. It's not just random. Okay, on to our second case study, this time looking at female discharges. And as we go through this, I want you to look for the patterns. You're going to see this isn't just a jumble of rules, but a really systematic parallel structure. For women, the source text points to a regular monthly period as the trigger for a 7-day state of ritual uncleanness. Now, what's so important here is that a completely normal, natural part of life is woven directly into the fabric of the community's ritual system. And just look at this. It's almost the exact same chain of transmission we saw with the men, right? The state spreads from the person to what they sit or lie on, and then to anyone who touches those things. This parallel structure is our biggest clue that these are not random rules, but part of a very carefully constructed system. The text also covers situations with irregular or prolonged discharges, and it applies the exact same principles. This just reinforces the idea that the system is based on the physical event itself, the discharge, not on the person. The rules are consistent across the board. So once a person is in this state of uncleanness, how do they get out? Well, that brings us to our next section, the path to purification. This is the process for getting back to a state of ritual cleanness, so a person could fully rejoin community worship. For most people who became unclean just by, say, touching an unclean person's chair, the process was pretty simple. They just had to wash their clothes, take a bath, and their ritual uncleanness would only last until sunset. That phrase you see, unclean till evening, it's like a code for a temporary, easily fixed condition. But for the person who was the original source of the uncleanness, the journey back was a lot more involved. As you can see, it starts with a whole 7-day waiting period after the discharge itself stops. Then comes the washing and bathing. And then, on the 8th day, they have to bring an offering to the priest, who performs a final ritual of atonement. It's a very precise, step-by-step process to be fully restored. So all of this leads us to the big question. We've seen the what and the how, but now we've got to understand the why. Why did this incredibly detailed system of ritual purity even exist in the first place? What was the ultimate point of it all? Let's just ask the question directly. After all these rules about beds and chairs and clay pots and waiting 7 days, what was the fundamental goal? Why separate the ceremonially clean from the unclean? Turns out, the answer is right there in the final lines of the text. And here it is. The reason for all these rules wasn't about social status or hygiene. It was, and I mean this quite literally, a matter of life and death. The text says the whole point is so people will not die in their uncleanness for defiling my dwelling place. The entire system was basically a giant protective barrier designed to keep ordinary human states from contaminating a sacred and powerful divine presence, which they believed would be lethal. So, that leaves us with this final thought. These specific rules might feel ancient, but those core ideas of purity, of separation, of what makes someone fit to belong to a group or enter a special space, those ideas are still incredibly powerful. So I'll leave you with this. Where do you see the echoes of these ancient purity concepts in our world today?